Welcome to Vaccine Debunk TV, stopping misinformation in its tracks. Sponsored by Excuse Me Doctor with Dr. Melissa Clark, Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, Facebook and YouTube Live. And now,
the weekly debunk, stopping misinformation in its tracks.
All right.
This is from Girl Bye. I've heard the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is inferior. By the time it gets to our community, that's all they're going to say. That's the only thing available because they don't care.
I don't know about that. Excuse me, Dr. Mel. Is that true? Girl Bye.
I think Girl Bye might have it a little wrong. So this is the deal with the J&J vaccine, which we know was just approved. We're seeing that it's 72% effective in the United States trials versus the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that seem to be 94 to 95% effective. So that's where I think the concern comes in. But this is what we have to realize. It's not an apples to apples comparison between these vaccines. Number one, because they were tested at different times. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was tested at the height of the pandemic, which was this past winter for us. And in addition, it was also tested against that more infectious South African strain because they did some of their clinical trials in South Africa. What they found, and remember, Pfizer and Moderna was not tested against that strain. So what they found was that it was 100% effective after about 6 weeks post-vaccination against severe COVID, which would make you end up in the ICU, and death. Nobody died. So that is wonderful. And it's one shot. And it doesn't have to be, deep frozen, so it can be easily disseminated across the country. It doesn't have those special storage considerations. So when it comes to safety, the number of serious safety events reported happened way more often in the placebo group as the folks that didn't get the real vaccine.
Right.
There were 7 deaths in the study. They all happened in the group that did not get the vaccine. In other words, the placebo group. And then finally, as far as does this apply to Black people, they actually had more Black people in the Johnson & Johnson study, partially because it was tested in South Africa. But it was 20%, if you look at globally, 20% of the study population, which is over 43,000 people, 20% of those were Black, I should say. And in the United States, 13% of them were Black, which is right on par with where we are as our general numbers in the population.
I thought you were going to say more Black people got tested because the last names were Johnson.
I knew you were going to say that.
No. Please, my listening audience, please don't pay attention to
what I heard, Dr. Mel. The vaccine is a weapon developed by the military, specifically the one that is Operation Warp Speed. That's to take out Black people and people of color because of overpopulation and depopulation of the Europeans. Dr. Mel, is that true?
No. That is not true.
And things.
However, I can understand why we as Black people have concerns about our government and its intentions to us. I mean, it goes back historically, and we don't even need to reiterate the Tuskegee experiment and forced sterilization and slavery and everything that our government has endorsed that has happened to us. And it also goes to currently the things that I've talked about, our own experiences with the healthcare system that have sometimes seemed to devalue us. So I get it. I get where it comes from. And then on top of that, you have how the virus and the response to the virus and the development of the vaccine has been politicized by the current administration. You have the terrible name of Operation Warp Speed that implies speed over safety. I get all of that. But the thing to keep in mind is if the government doesn't need to develop something to kill us because the coronavirus is doing a great job all by itself. The death rate for African Americans is 3 times that of Caucasian Americans. So the government doesn't need to do anything else to help the coronavirus. The other thing is Yes, Operation Warp Speed funding did go to some companies to develop the vaccine. However, Pfizer did not take any Warp Speed money. And then finally, the speed within Warp Speed also is a misnomer because the work had predated the Trump administration by 10 years in terms of the platform that's being used to deliver the vaccine and the virus mRNA to the body. We talked about what mRNA was last week. It's the instructions that your cell gets from the virus to make more virus. M stands for messenger. So that messenger RNA is something that our own body makes within our cells to instruct our cells what to make in terms of what our own body needs, the proteins that our body needs. So messenger RNA is something that our body gets exposed to anyway. So all it being sort of the boogeyman in this as something that can kill us is actually ridiculous, because it's something that if you get a regular virus infection, the cold has its own messenger RNA that it brings into your body when you get infected with the cold virus. And your body has its own messenger RNA, like I said. So it's not true at all that this was developed to kill us. For our weekly debunk this week, we're dealing with, I read on Facebook that if you took a flu shot in the past 10 years, you will test positive for COVID-19. I can't tell you how many things I get in my inbox and emails and text messages. That's where I get my weekly debunks from, everyone, because there are things that people send to me that I can clearly see are erroneous. And so I figure if one person is sending it to me, then that means that there must be some level of confusion out there. So this is what to keep in mind with that and why that's absolutely wrong. First of all, COVID-19 is a disease caused by something called a coronavirus. Influenza is caused by an influenza virus. They're two totally different things. It's like a cow and a horse. They're two totally different things. You wouldn't confuse them, right? Secondly, when you get vaccinated with the influenza vaccine, they use a piece of the virus or the whole virus that's dead or inactivated. Your body mounts an immune response. So the antibodies that your body puts out there, like the soldiers that fight off the virus, they fight off the whatever was injected into you for the vaccine. They kill it, they eliminate it, and the only thing that's left is the antibodies. So there's no way that you would confuse an antibody with another virus, a coronavirus. And there is no similarity between the two. So we can safely rest that debunk and know that there is absolutely no connection between the flu vaccine and having received it 10 years ago or 2 years ago or last year and testing positive for the coronavirus. Furthermore, the person who put that myth out, his name is Dr. Bhutan. He's a discredited doctor from North Carolina. He was reprimanded by the North Carolina Board of Medicine for putting out these kinds of claims and doing sort of uncertain practices that were not based in science. So there's a little bit of credibility issue on that doctor's part. And he's been the main one promoting this theory. So just wanted to warn you about that. And then the last thing on that before we close is that with the weekly debunk is that so many people have gotten tested for the coronavirus and tested negative. Wouldn't you think that a significant portion of those people had received the flu vaccine last year? Okay, so we can put that one to bed. Two daily debunks for you this week. The first is, now that I've had COVID, I don't need to wear a mask, right? Well, unfortunately, it appears that that's not the case. Two high-profile cases have grabbed our attention this week. The first was a gentleman in Hong Kong who has turned out to have COVID-19 twice. The good news is the second time he had it, he didn't have any symptoms, so that's great. However, we have a case right here in the United States of a gentleman who had COVID in April, had a couple of tests in between that were negative, and he felt better. And then again in August, he got symptoms, and it turned out that he tested positive again. This time it appears he got a new strain of coronavirus. Now, we know that the common cold, which is a type of coronavirus, we know that, we've had multiple colds over our lifetime. So it's kind of not a surprise that it looks like this related coronavirus does cause reinfection. We also have known that our antibodies go down when it comes to COVID-19 after about 8 to 12 weeks after being infected. But we have what's called cellular immunity, our T cells that remember and can produce antibodies if we are re-exposed to the COVID-19 virus. So, bottom line, if you've had COVID, still wear a mask, still physically distance, still practice good hygiene. And then our second debunk. I saw this video, and I'm sure you all have seen it, of a guy who's vaping in order to show that masks don't work. So, can you roll the video?
Above and keep my glasses from fogging. Lo and behold, the aerosols go all around it. Has no effect on me spreading aerosols to you. Now, a cloth mask I borrowed.
So he goes on to demonstrate different masks. So is this really true? Well, he says he's a doctor. I don't know if that's true or not. And in any good misinformation video, there's some half-truths. There's a grain of truth buried in there. So in this one, we know that not all masks provide a tight fit. We know that. Cloth masks, surgical masks, KN95 masks do not provide a tight fit. There's only one mask that does, and that's the N95 mask that healthcare workers wear. And because they're in short supply, the public has been asked to wear cloth masks, or they're now selling surgical masks. But we know that masks work. We know that in countries that have used masks, that has helped them to flatten the curve. We know that surgeons, there's a reason it's called a surgical mask. Surgeons wear it to block viruses and bacteria from coming out of their mouths and dropping into the sterile surgical field when they're operating on you. The key is this: the size of the micro droplets that contain the coronavirus, if you're infected, that come out of your mouth as saliva, are much larger than that vape smoke that you saw him blow. It's also less voluminous. So he took a big breath of vape smoke in and he blew it out. It doesn't contain the aerosols to the same degree as talking, coughing, or sneezing. And those aerosols move differently because they're bigger. They have different properties. So the mask does help to block some of those particles. The other thing is, we know, like I said, that air escapes from the side. We know this. You can even feel it when you wear a cloth mask or a surgical mask. But the key is this: risk mitigation. The idea is to decrease the dose of virus that you're exposed to. When you wear a mask, you block a significant amount of virus from escaping from your mouth and nose. And so that protects the other person who's away from you. So coupled with physical distancing, coupled with the other person wearing a mask, that's why we talk about the importance of doing both. I see a lot of people out there wearing a mask, being up on somebody else. That's not enough. The physical distancing part is important as well. So those are our
weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
Girl Bye said, I heard that Bill Gates funded the vaccine. It's a quantum dot tattoo that is scannable via the artificial enzyme luciferase. The vaccine chip is to contain your medical records, your vaccine records, and a digitized world currency.
I don't know about that. Excuse me, Dr. Mel. Is that true? So that might seem really outlandish to you all, but believe it or not, that exact tweet was shared 832 times. So there are people who really do believe that that's true, but it is not a thing. Repeat, it is not a thing. First of all, in this scenario, is the vaccine a tattoo or is it a chip? First of all. Secondly, where do these words like luciferase come from? It sounds like they took the name of the devil and stuck the term, right, Lucifer, and stuck the ending ace on it, which is typically the name that you hear on the end of an enzyme, like, an enzyme in your body. So it makes it sound very scientific and official, but there is no such thing as luciferase. And then Bill Gates, he always gets dragged into this, and it's not clear what his motivation is in doing this. What we do know is that his foundation has had a very positive track record in decreasing deaths from childhood diseases in developing countries. And as I've pointed out before, he keeps getting linked to depopulation. Well, the reason why, and there's a quote where he talks about, controlling population growth, it's because when fewer children die in a family because of infectious childhood diseases like malaria, for example, families choose to have fewer children because they're assured that their children will reach adulthood. And therefore, that makes the quality of life for that family better because they have more resources to be able to give to the children that they do choose to have. They're not having them just sort of playing the luck of the draw. That happened here in the United States. That's why family sizes decreased in the United States because of vaccination. So the other thing is, if this were true, everybody worldwide would have to be in on it. So, this chip thing, governments, the FDA and their equivalents in all countries, all the scientists that worked on this worldwide in all the labs, the companies that manufacture it. And I say, in this whistleblower culture where everybody has a platform, don't you think somebody with definitive proof would have come out if that was actually the case, that this thing has a chip in it? And then the other thing is, if you're really curious and you want to know what's in the vaccine, it's there for all the world to see on the FDA's website. It's basically the virus material to make the spike protein so that your immune system recognizes the spike protein when it's manufactured by your body, as facilitated by the vaccine. And then there has to be something to help protect that genetic material of the virus as it enters your body. So there's a little casing that's made of fat, salts, and sugars that just kind of hold it together and protects it as it enters your body and gets to your cells. And when it gets to your cells, it gets taken in. The genetic material instructions get delivered to the cell. And then that all gets destroyed as soon as those instructions are delivered. So there's no chance for it to stay around in your body and be used as a chip and with all this stuff going on. And then finally, we already have tracking devices. They're called our cell phones. And yeah, we don't really need any additional tracking devices. So that's the debunk. What we just heard, that's not true.
Wow. Is pertinent. This comes from Diane Walker Whitaker. She has sarcoidosis and is on the fence about the vaccine. What would be your thoughts about this situation? Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Great question about sarcoidosis. First of all, I would say talk to your doctor, the doctor who treats you for your sarcoid, and also what medications you're currently on. If you're on any immunosuppressives, you need to talk with your doctor about, taking the vaccine and the timing of the vaccine. That's the first thing. And immunosuppressants are things that suppress your immune system. Sometimes people with autoimmune diseases like sarcoid are on them so that it diminishes their symptoms. Sarcoid, though, in and of itself, is not a reason to not take the vaccine. They enrolled people with a variety of chronic diseases, and those individuals were found to be protected from getting symptoms of COVID-19 at a rate of 94% on average across the study. Like I said, if you look at just black people, it was 100% effective. If you look at the subset of people who had chronic diseases, it was 94% effective. So in and of itself, it is not a reason to not get vaccinated.
Well, one of my friends jokingly posted that his 2 doses of his 2 doses are smoothies of greens and beets and celery, blah blah blah. Right? So he's joking, but he's saying that's my vaccine. But Dr. Mel, can you just say how important the vitamins are to support the vaccine? I think it's important that we kind of explore that a little bit.
Yeah, last week we talked about vitamins and vaccines are not an either or, it's a yes and, right? And
Right.
salute to your friend in terms of his health regimen. What that does is help to decrease chronic inflammation in his body. But, we don't know, it hasn't been studied yet as to whether that is enough to keep you from getting a severe case of COVID, certainly. And it definitely doesn't keep you from getting and spreading it, right? And so that's where vaccines come in and fill the gap. All a vaccine does is teach your immune system how to specifically respond to COVID. Vegetables don't necessarily do that. So that's why they're complementary strategies, not an either or. But the news this week about vegetables and fruits is that if you get your 5 servings a day, and they broke it down into 2 servings of fruit and 3 servings of vegetables, it prolongs life. It helps to avoid heart disease, stroke, cancer, and even lung disease. And the important thing is it's not like the sugary and starchy vegetables, like you can't, get French fries and say, I'm good, I got potatoes in. You want to focus on the vitamin C and the beta carotene rich vegetables like carrots, greens like kale and spinach, and my favorite, mustard greens. You want to do fruits like citrus and berries that are lower in sugar. So I think, he's on to something in terms of definitely decreasing chronic inflammation in his body and avoiding some of those chronic diseases.
I'm going to go to why we distrust. Let's go to why we distrust. One of the main things that everybody likes to throw up is the Tuskegee experiment.
Yep.
And really, what did
which
we
is
hear?
so out of context anyway. But
it speaks to the distrust of government, right? It speaks to the distrust of government. But how it's done, they're not going to shoot me up like they did, the Tuskegee experiment people. They're not going to shoot me.
That's not exactly what happened.
That's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
You obviously got your information on Facebook. Obviously.
And God bless you.
And God bless you. But let's once again, we're going to go back to Wayne Turnage, the Deputy Mayor of Health and Human Services for the District of Columbia, your nation's capital. And he's a history buff. So listen to him talk about Tuskegee experiment.
To the Tuskegee study, thinking that the Tuskegee study had something to do with people being injected. Can you clear that up for us, please?
Yeah, I think that's a big misperception about the Tuskegee study, which was, I don't make any excuses for the horrific nature in which that study was conducted, but they did not inject men with syphilis. Basically, they did an environmental scan of the community and found, I think it was 600 men for the study, and these men were already infected with syphilis, and the unethical treatment of those men came with the decision by the researchers who were working for the Tuskegee Institute to not inform the men that they were infected with syphilis, and they just followed them for 35 years to sort of see what the ravages of syphilis would be. And even when they found a treatment for syphilis, they failed to tell. They refused to tell the men who were infected, and it cost some of them their lives. It certainly resulted in some of these men infecting their spouses, and it was just a terrible thing to do. And
Yes.
but it didn't involve the injection of syphilis. That doesn't make it. That would have made it a lot worse, obviously, but it certainly doesn't make it much better, given the way the study was conducted. And so I've seen research that says, at the time that before the syphilis, before the scandal was exposed, the gap in health outcomes between black and white men was declining. Actually, that they were closing the gap. We were closing the gap. And when that study was released, or when the whistleblower went public, they had a chilling effect on the health-seeking behavior of black men. And as a result, there are some studies that indicate that probably about 30% of the current health gap is due to the lingering effects of the Tuskegee Institute study, which is just awful.
Let's move on to our weekly debunk. What's the debunk that we need to address this week? Well, now that restaurants have reopened, brunch with the girls should be safe, right? Well, not exactly. Let's think about that. So there was a study, and they talked to 300 people at testing sites across the United States, some who tested positive later, some who tested negative, and they asked them what had they been doing in the 2 weeks prior to getting tested. And then they compared the answers of the people who turned out positive and the people who tested negative. Turns out there was no difference in how much they shopped or went to the gym or went to the office or went to religious ceremonies or even used public transportation. The one difference was how much they ate out at restaurants. That appeared to be the main issue. And think about it. It kind of makes sense, right? In a restaurant, that's the one place where you have to take off your mask. And if you're dining indoors, the ventilation system may not be what's necessary to keep the air filtered. And in addition, you're probably seated close to someone at your table or next to them or across from them, less than 6 feet away. And if you're meeting up with friends, these are not people who've lived with you. You don't know what precautions they've been taking. And so it does put you at great risk. And so, no, it is probably not a wise decision to dine indoors. And
I saw a video over the weekend, and I don't want to say who put it out. If you Google videos about the vaccine and what it's going to do to black people or just people in general, there were several takeaways from that I got. And one of them, they just kept pushing this whole thing about Bill Gates and Oprah. It's always Bill Gates and Oprah or Bill Gates and Fauci.
And you're right. It is always them. And that actually comes from Russian bots and trolls that we've talked about on this show in the past, as researched at University of Maryland, that use those same boogeymen, Gates and Oprah and Hillary Clinton. They use that to scare people into not taking the flu vaccine. And then when COVID came around, they just substituted Fauci's name for Clinton. So these are old tactics that have been repurposed now to try to scare people not to take the coronavirus vaccine. The other thing, I saw that same video that you're talking about, Wayne. The other thing is that they wanted that the people were alleging that it seems so suspicious that they're pushing black people to the front of the line and having black people take it first. Well, that's not true. Everybody is being offered this vaccine, and it's based on risk, not race. So healthcare workers are at the front of the line. They're 1A.
From Boy Bye this week.
Boy Bye says, everybody talking about the one-shot J&J vaccine, but aren't Johnson & Johnson's the one who put aluminum in baby powder? How can we trust them?
I don't know about that. Is that true, Dr. Mel? So this was actually a concern of our panelist last week, who was a guest on our show, and she brought this issue up. And I really wasn't familiar with Johnson & Johnson putting aluminum in talcum powder. So I researched it. So I wanted to get back to you all this week with the answer. So that Johnson & Johnson did settle a lawsuit about asbestos, not aluminum, in their talcum powder. So their baby powder, shower to shower, as being related to causing ovarian cancer in women. Now, this is the deal. Asbestos is sometimes found in the same area where talc, which makes talcum powder, where talc is mined. So it contaminates the product. It's not like anybody is intentionally adding asbestos to the product. So the issue is that they did not adequately test for contamination. And this is actually a travesty right here. They did target overweight and African-American women in their ad campaigns as their market share in the baby market started to take a nosedive as this information came out. So yeah, that part definitely concerning. But it's important to note when we're talking about vaccines, they go through a very different approval process than cosmetics. Cosmetic products like baby powder are not required to undergo FDA approval. And it's only since this issue with asbestos in the talcum powder came to light that the FDA started testing, and now there's a warning on baby powder. The FDA for vaccines and medications, as opposed to cosmetics, rigorously tests these vaccines. They go through a multi-step approval process. And this COVID vaccine is the most scrutinized vaccine and treatment probably ever in the history of the Western world. So we know that it was developed partly by government scientists led by an African-American woman who graduated from University of Maryland, Baltimore City, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. We know that labs all over the world worked on it. It's been scrutinized by academics, by government scientists alike worldwide. So the bottom line, vaccines do not have additives. They have been vetted and scrutinized. Individual corporations are not what should be trusted, but the scientific process that this vaccine went through. COVID is killing people. Vaccines are not. Everyone needs to be vaccinated for the public good to minimize the spread of the disease. So that was what I was surprised by,
You've been watching Vaccine Debunk TV, stopping misinformation in its tracks. Hosted by Dr. Mel, Dr. Melissa Clark, the producers Wayne and Lila. Remember, if you're unsure about the facts, ask your physician. Call or visit the CDC website for more information, www.cdc.gov.